But you could say they have the same basic rights that we give to all humans, including very young humans who also don't have the right to vote, and that is the rights to have their interests given equal weight. And if something is going to cause animals to suffer, I think that should be taken just as seriously as something that causes humans to suffer.
This is, in a way, related that you've argued in some cases that an adult chimp has more right to live than a newborn human. Tell me about that argument. A lot of these discussions have provoked so much, what would I call it? I keep coming back to the word controversy, but I think it's sometimes frequently attached to you, Professor. So let's talk about it.
Right. So the question that I was raising there, and I think this is a philosophical question, is what is it that makes it wrong to take a being's life? What is it that makes it worse to take the life of one being rather than another? And I don't think the fact that a being is a member of a particular species in itself is what's important. I think that what's important is what kind of capacities does that being have? Does that being have a capacity to think about their future, to have hopes and plans for the future, and to live their life today? And newborn infants clearly don't think about their future and plan for their future. So although they have a potential, and of course usually their parents love them and want them to go on living, all of those things are very important reasons why it would be wrong to end their life. But in some particular circumstances where their life prospects are really poor and where their parents do not think that it's a good thing for them if they continue to live, then I don't think that they have an absolute right to life. And if we compare that with a chimpanzee who does have some capacity to think about the future, I think that's been clearly shown, then you might say that from the intrinsic point of view of that being, you're taking more from the chimpanzee than you are from the newborn human infant.
I will now have people shouting at their radios, maybe throwing things at it as they hear your voice come through with those comments. And so I do want to put that out there, that I know there's been so much debate and people pushing back against that. But on that philosophy that you put out there, do you expect people to agree with you, or are you just using it to provoke debate, or are you looking to change policy with ideas like this?
I'm certainly not putting it out there just to provoke. I don't do that. I put out ideas that I think are accurate, are correct, are sound, defensible. And yes, sometimes I think policies should be changed.
I want to move on to another area now with you, Professor Singer. So many of your ideas have provoked debate, perhaps none more so than you're thinking on abortion or euthanasia, the rights of the parents to end the life of a child with disabilities. There were protests from disability rights activists, actually, when you took up your position at Princeton University in the United States. But I want to turn to our next questioner, Rosemary Garland-Thompson, Professor Emerita of English and Bioethics at Emory University in the United States. You're so welcome, Professor Garland-Thompson.
Thank you for this opportunity to be here, and congratulations, Professor Singer, on this really wonderful award.
Thank you.
In making your case for animal rights, you've suggested that if we kill animals because they're not human, then we should also consider it morally acceptable to kill newborns, infants, who have disabilities that are significant enough that they don't really meet our standards for consciousness or have the potential for a good life. So the moral conflict here is between a parent's right to choose their family members and the moral objection to killing people because they have disabilities. Now, in the really almost 50 years since you wrote books such as Animal Liberation and the book entitled Should the Baby Be Killed?, the prospects for having a good life for people with disabilities and their families, at least in wealthy nations, have really improved significantly. So, given these changes that I'm describing, here's my question. Would you today still hold that a parent has the ethical right to kill an infant that they don't want because that infant or child has a disability?
Thank you very much for that question. I think that I do still defend the views that I took a long time ago, but of course they're not simply that parents should have the right to kill a child because the child has a disability. It is when the disability is severe enough to have such an effect on that child's life that the child does not have prospects of having a life that it can be regarded as positive. Now, of course, that will raise the question, well, who makes that decision? But I think the parents are probably in the best position to make that decision, although I do say, and this is something that I've added since I first wrote on this, that they shouldn't simply rely on what the doctors say, because doctors themselves may be prejudiced against people with disabilities. They should try to consult with organisations, either of people who have the disability that their child has, if those people are capable of participating in discussions, or with the parents of children with those disabilities. That's, I think, the place to get the best information. And of course, as you say, there has been, fortunately, great progress in improving the lives of people with disabilities, both social and medical. And that's going to be very relevant to that decision.
I think one important philosophical point to make is that we have, as humans, a limited imagination to imagine what kind of a life someone will have, what kind of a future, an open future one will have. We now, especially in wealthy nations, know a great deal of abstract information about a potential baby that is entering into our families. Once a child is actually in someone's arms, they have a different capacity for a relationship than we do with the unborn child.
I agree that there is this difference, but I don't think the difference always goes in the direction of continuing life rather than ending it. There was an interesting New York Times opinion piece written a year or two ago by a philosopher called Gary Comstock about his child who had been born with a very severe disability. And because the disability was life-threatening, the doctors did not recommend keeping the child alive with a ventilator, which would have been necessary. But instead, they gave the child to him to hold until the child died. But that meant that the child suffocated rather slowly. And Professor Comstock's view at the end of the column was he didn't think that the baby should have been kept alive, but he also didn't think that the way that the baby died was the right way for the life to end. He thinks he should have killed his baby, and that's the baby who he held in his arms.
And of course, heartbreaking for any parents that have ever had to go through this situation. Thank you so much, Professor Garland Thompson. The failure of imagination that Professor Garland Thompson brought up there, I thought was very striking, I have to say, about, that we can't predict what a life will be. A very beautiful, actually, image that the professor put forward there. You are listening to the BBC World Service with me, Nuala McGovern. I'm talking to one of the world's most influential philosophers, Peter Singer, about how we should live an ethical life. Now, I want to move on to another area, and we have somebody who would like to speak to you, Professor. This is another professor. This is Professor of Philosophy at Witwatersrand University in South Africa. It's Professor Edwin Etiyibo. You're very welcome, Professor. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
So, your question.
Hi, Professor Singer. Nice to see you.
Hello, very nice to talk to you.
Not too long ago, you were involved in what you called yourself a Twitter storm. Last year, after your interview in the New Yorker, you talked about the people you choose to work with. Given your commitment to effective altruism, do you think this is undermined? Or the amount of good you do and others can do globally is undercut by you not working more with minorities or non-Caucasians, like the scholars from Africa, Asia, South America, since they understand more the local and cultural conditions that may enhance the goal that one is working at promoting?
Thank you for your question. Firstly, I do work with some people from Africa. I've been working on population with Professor Alex Ize, who's from Nigeria, and Professor Yotham Musinguzi from Uganda. So I have worked with Africans. But if you're referring specifically to the work I do on effective altruism, I'm not hands-on working with people in poverty anywhere in the world. What I'm doing is urging people who have the means and resources to donate to effective charities. And those charities, of course, who do work with people in extreme poverty in low-income countries, do work very closely with people in those countries, and they wouldn't be effective if they didn't.
Thank you very much, Professor Singer. You seem to suggest that, you would have liked to work more, but you don't sometimes even know who these people are. The question would be, why didn't you obviously search for more of these people? Because, of course, you had the means to be able to hire maybe assistant researchers who could have brought in some different cultural perspective into some of the philosophical work you do.
I think I understand what you're asking, some about the practical work and others within the philosophical field, because it can be a primarily white field within certain philosophical circles, I think still, perhaps in some universities.
Yes, I actually don't think it's exclusively white. The professor mentioned non-Caucasian, but there are a number of Asians. I currently have a research project on artificial intelligence with a researcher from Hong Kong of Chinese background. It's true, and I think it's regrettable that with Africa in particular, the connections have not been so strong, and in terms of hiring people, for example, as research assistants, I haven't come across the people who had the particular skills that I needed. Now, that may just be the lack of contacts and communications. I have no doubt that there are those people with those skills, but with a couple of exceptions, I haven't come across people from Africa nearly as much as I've come across with people from Asia or Europe.
Do you ever get, and I should say thank you very much actually to Professor Atiebo for getting in touch. I want to talk about your students. I found this pretty fascinating. So to do the most good that they can, you said you often advise them to go into highly paid careers like finance so they can earn more money and give that money to charity, as well as trying to do good in the current system. Do you encourage your students to try and build a fairer system?
Oh, certainly. I think that I talk to my students about fairness and the fact that our society is extremely inegalitarian, that a very small percentage of the population have a lot of the wealth and power. But I do teach mostly ethics rather than political philosophy and political theory, and I think questions about changing the political systems are more questions for political philosophy. I also think that they're very difficult things to achieve, and I focus on issues where I think people have the power to make a change. I focus less on questions like, can we abolish global capitalism and replace it with a fairer system? Because honestly, I don't know how you would do that, and I don't think anybody really has a good idea as to how you would do that, or even what would be the best system to replace it with. I'm more practical, I guess, than talking about those questions.
Well, you are a utilitarian. I think, actually, with that, I'll have a lot of people also shouting at the radio saying, I know the system to replace it with, and here's how, Professor. But
I'm waiting. I've asked them many, many times, and I've yet to get a persuasive answer.
Answers on a postcard or on our Facebook page. Do you ever get fed up just always thinking about the moral consequences of your actions? Do you ever just feel like throwing caution to the wind and doing what you like, regardless of what the impact will be?
No, I'm not really the kind of person who throws caution to the winds.
Are you? Never?
Pretty much never. Never in things that make a difference. Like, maybe I do things like, one of my recreations is I go surfing. So I guess, I'm enjoying myself. I'm getting some exercise. I'm outdoors. I'm not really thinking about the consequences. And maybe occasionally I go for a wave that I shouldn't, and I get wiped off, and it was not such a pleasant experience. So, in little things like that, I might not be entirely cautious. But in the larger issues, I think I am.
Shall we move to a different area?
Okay.
Okay. Our next question comes from Taiwan, and the Venerable